this camera has some serious time-lapse capability. The video out of this camera has to be talked about. Listen up, because this is only going to get better and better. Hello, this is Todd Millen, and I am here today reviewing an interesting little camera from Xiaoyi. It's called the Yi M1. It's got a lot of bad reviews, and some of it is deservingly, but I think that a little bit this is an underrated camera. So basically, this is not a review to trash the camera, nor is it a review to give it praise. It's basically just to give you the straight poop on what the deal with this camera is. It's a micro four thirds 4K capable camera, meaning it can record 4K image quality in video, which at times can be very impressive. It has a fairly low bit rate, which unfortunately results in video, especially if there's fast motion going on or a lot of detail in your scene. You're gonna see a lot of just not pleasant stuff going on. If you're filming in a situation where there's not a lot going on, you know, it can be pretty impressive 4K video. This camera comes with a kit lens, and there's actually two choices. You can get the single kit lens, which right now I have on is a 12 to 40 millimeter f3.5 lens, which can be okay. And there's also a dual kit lens, or dual kit, that has two lenses, this and a prime lens as well. The prime, in my opinion, is pointless. And the reason is because it has a focus ring that's completely false. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't turn. It doesn't have any functionality other than maybe a little more grip for your fingers. Unlike this lens actually has, you can actually focus with this lens. In my opinion, you're better off for the extra price of the kit for two lenses. You can find a much better micro four thirds lens with full functionality for manual and autofocus as well, and stabilization, which we're going to get into a little bit here. So when it comes to the lens that is on this camera right now, it's capable of really sharp, beautiful images. In my experience, those really sharp, beautiful images are the rarity. The problem with this lens is that it hunts and pecks more than Woody Woodpecker and Elmer Fudd's love child. The autofocus just doesn't lock on. It's kind of breathing and trying to find the autofocus, find the focus point, but it really hits and misses, and more often misses. So for that reason, I decided to try one of my Panasonic lenses, a 14 to 42 millimeter, which is very similar focal range, which has autofocus as well. That lens was night and day difference. The focus is just so much quicker and accurate, and it just locks on. And even where this lens here, when it says it's locking on, it'll give you a little green bracket. I found that when I reviewed the photos, they weren't sharp, they weren't focused. Sometimes yes, but often no. The Panasonic lens was very accurate, and the images just came out much sharper. Plus, that lens is about the cheapest lens you can get, at about $50 used on eBay or somewhere. And it's actually capable of much shorter focal distances. So there's no reason, in my opinion, to keep this lens on the camera. And that's probably the first thing you should do is, I guess, sell it if you can. Maybe hope for a firmware update on the lens itself, because I suspect that's the problem. Now, a lot of reviews chalk that focus issue up to being in camera. It's not an in-camera issue. I found immediately, like I said, as soon as I put that Panasonic lens on, that the focus issue was resolved. Any other Panasonic or even Olympus or even third-party lenses with autofocus function are gonna be better than this lens, because it's obviously the lens and not the camera. The camera was fine communicating with the Panasonic lens, and it worked wonderfully. It really was night and day difference. And for that reason alone, the camera becomes a lot more interesting. There are some other issues though, and they need to be mentioned. The image stabilization as well. This lens does not have stabilization. The Panasonic lens does. So again, there's a very good reason to update to a better lens. The camera, you cannot avoid it. It absolutely will freeze on you. And when I say freeze, what I mean is if you're doing video, it might just completely freeze the screen and you'll have no functionality. You won't be able to access anything. You won't even be able to turn it on and off with the on and off switch. The only solution is to drop the battery out of the camera and put it back in. And after you do that, it's fine. It's fully functioning as if nothing happened. The problem with that is if you have this mounted on a tripod or a rig, it can be next to impossible. And that brings me to another issue with this camera, and this is a huge pet peeve for me. When you put a tripod mount on the camera, don't center it with the camera, center it with the lens. And there's two reasons to do that. One, it often gives you more space to drop the battery out of a rig. The other thing is, if you're putting this on a rig with a mount box like the one behind me here, or a gimbal that has a lens support, anything with a lens support, you want this tripod mount to be lined up in the center of the lens so that the support or the matte box is perfectly lined up. Now, I can barely use it with this matte box behind me, but I have to actually tilt the camera at an angle, which means that whichever direction I'm pointing my rig is not the true direction the camera is pointing, and I have to counteract that. So that's a big no-no. Yee, I hope you're listening for your next camera. Another huge pet peeve, I have these little floppity lens strap attachments, and you hear that? It's annoying, right? It's super annoying. In fact, I'm just gonna take these off right now, okay? This is just, they're terrible, and I don't understand why they put them on. A lot of the better cameras, not even some of the, I've bought very cheap cameras that have lugs recessed in there, much bigger opening for you to put your straps into. These are just ridiculous. It's like something you would buy at a dollar store attached to some really cheap plastic light up toy or something. So I'm gonna take these off right now. No more. I'll figure out another way to get lens strap on there. Okay, look at that. I have the lugs, those crappy little flippity floppity, seriously, like a paper clip somebody bent up and just shoved on the camera. We'll just put some paper clips on the camera and call it good. Yeah, I really don't understand. I mean, you might as well just have these because, some of the really cheap cameras out there that have that little thread that you loop through and pull through. You just put a couple of those on each of these, and then you could attach a real strap to those, and you no longer have that rattling sound, which if you're doing handheld video, you really don't want something rattling around on your video. So that's much better. I can roll it around my hands now and no more sound. Which brings me to another interesting point about this camera. This camera, one of the things it excels at is the ergonomics. Although it's pretty small, and I have, if you can't tell, pretty big, thick hands, but I can get my hand in here. My fingers are barely touching the lens. But what's awesome here is this grip, which is actually shaped like a quarter pipe. If you're a skateboarder, you know what a quarter pipe is. It's almost goes to vertical, and even though it's just a little bit of space in there, it really grips your fingers. You can even do a one finger hold, and it just doesn't want to fall off your fingers. It's really stable. You actually, unless you're sweating, you have to try to drop this camera. It really just does not want to fall off your fingers. So whoever designed the grip on this camera, good job. It is engineering feat, and I commend you for that. So what else is good about this camera? Well, as mentioned, it takes some pretty good photos, especially once you get rid of this lens, or once they update the firmware. Please update the firmware for this lens, because the photos I've seen are amazing sharp. Please update the firmware. So with another lens on here, you can take some great photos. It really does have an impressive ability. It has 20 megapixel Sony sensor, and the images out of it are really, really nice. Especially, you can do RAW, and in RAW, you're obviously going to have a lot more latitude for editing. As far as the rest of the body goes, again, I've heard people or seen people trashing it, saying it feels plasticky and cheap, but the plastic is nearly identical to Panasonic's coating they had on their older cameras, and I believe they still have over their newer aluminum body cameras. And the grip, as I mentioned, is great. It really is, it's a little bit soft and sticky, so it really just grabs your fingers. No problems there. I will say though, the LCD screen, well, it's a bit dirty at the moment. I took it out for a hike and I did have a lens strap attached, and it's the only thing I can imagine is the lens strap just barely brushed against it with a rounded metal piece though, and it managed to put a little scratch on the screen. It's nothing major, nothing hugely noticeable, but I'd just say that I've had a Panasonic GH2 for 7 years and the LCD screen has yet to get any scratches on it. So this material, I would actually maybe recommend just buy like a cell phone film and cut it to size and put it on here. Something like that anyways, to give just a little extra protection if you care about that, if you want to keep this clean looking, maybe for resale. So, the video out of this camera has to be talked about. As mentioned, it is under, the bit rate is under what it should be. It's about 60 megabits per second compared to Panasonics that are usually a minimum of 100 all the way up to 200 megabits per second. The result is you just get these weird little effects in the video, and it just doesn't look clean. It's more akin to what you might see on a smartphone or a cheap camera. So the bit rate is fixable. Ye just needs to up the bit rate in the camera, and you should see a lot better results in the video. Now, if you use stabilization, you're going to get less of that weird, glitchy look in the video, because you're just going to have a smoother pan, so it's not going to have to figure it out. What it is basically, when you have a lower bit rate, it's filling in the gaps with, you know, information that's not really there, and that information can be very wrong. So because of the ability to freeze, that remarkable, wonderful, not so wonderful ability for this camera to freeze up on you, this is a reason that I cannot recommend this camera for anything like a professional photo shoot with, you know, live action, like a wedding, a band, and so on. For shoestring budget independent film, you know, something, or street photography, anywhere where you're not absolutely dependent on this camera not failing. In other words, if you can reshoot it, if people working with you are patient and understand this is a low budget film, we have a low budget camera, and we're gonna have to reshoot, okay? But bear in mind, that means you might have lost the perfect shot and you're just gonna have to do your best to recreate it. But, you know, be that as it may, some people just don't have the money for a higher end camera, and $300, you know, you can't go wrong. But it does work. It does work, and again, it can with a, like, let's say a gimbal, and as long as you're being really smooth with your shots, it can create some great 4K video. That being said, for about the same price, for about $300 right now, you can get a used Panasonic G7 camera. A G7 is capable of 4K video at much better bit rates and much better implement codec. It just looks really beautiful, on par with GH4 footage, if you've seen GH4 footage, and GH5 footage to some extent. So it's really, if you're doing it for video, I would probably recommend try to find yourself a good used G7. Now, am I saying that you should never buy this camera because of that? No, I'm really not. I'm saying that for video, you might want to look elsewhere until they update the bit rate on this, if they in fact do. But for photos, I think the results you're going to see out of the photos from this are probably going to beat a G7 camera. So if you're more into photos, that's a serious consideration. You are, however, limited by the fact that this does not have an electronic viewfinder here. Unfortunately, it's just the screen on the back. As far as LCD screens go, it, at its brightest setting, which I have it on right now, is fairly bright, and in most outdoor situations you can see it. But anytime the sun hits it at the wrong angle, you're pretty much blind. You can't see it all. So for me, that's pretty much a deal breaker, because I don't like to shoot outside at all without an electronic viewfinder. Though I said it's pretty much a deal breaker, there is one reason that I personally am actually going to hold on to this camera. So I've been saving the best for last. This camera is actually a little bit of a time-lapse beast. I was really surprised. I didn't have to dig very deep into the menu to find that it has a very intuitive, simple, yet very full, capable time-lapse ability. So if you're into time-lapse or you're even curious about doing time-lapse, this camera really is something you should consider, and you should listen up because this is only going to get better and better. So in the video mode, it's capable of doing 1 photo per half second all the way up to 1 photo every 60 seconds, which is good. But what's even more impressive is that it can do that for 24 hours. So you can do a full day of recording time-lapse. And that's something you don't see in most time-lapse cameras or time-lapse capable cameras. You can find it, but it's pretty rare. But this is where it gets even more amazing. Okay, when you take it into photo mode for time lapses, you are now able to do 1 photo per per full second, all the way up to 1 photo per 23 hours, 59 minutes, and 59 seconds. So you're able to do 1 photo per day. Now, why would you want to do that? In photo mode, you're able to do, it doesn't give you a time limit, it gives you a number of shots. Your maximum is 9,999 shots. Now, what does that mean? That means in theory, now this is just in theory, okay? We're not talking the life expectancy of this camera, because in theory, you could do about 27 years with 1 photo per day of time lapse. Now that's longer than most cameras' life expectancies, the life expectancy of most small mammals, and some people. So it's really, really crazy. It means that you're probably not gonna be able to do a 27-year time lapse, but the door is open for basically the lifespan of this camera to do some very interesting things. That right there has actually convinced me to keep this camera a little bit longer. I'm not a professional time-lapse photographer by any means, but I would love to try some of this out. Especially, some of the new gimbals that are coming out have time-lapse functions, so this would be a really good option for that. And for people that are into time-lapse, a lot of people, they have to hike out and set up 2 or 3 cameras doing multiple angles to create these time lapses, and for at least a day, sometimes a week. So it makes sense to use something like this. Again, it has a great sensor and is capable of great raw photos or high quality JPEGs, to be able to go out there with something that's only a $300 camera versus $3,000 camera. Put 2 or 3 out there, and the weight is so much less. The cost is so much less, so you can pack in a lot more, and that means the sliders and things like that can be a lot less weight because they don't have to handle the big heavy cameras. And the cost, of course, is wonderful because for the price of 3 cameras, you're still under budget compared to 3 expensive or even 1 expensive camera. So this is kind of a time-lapse beast. Like I said, I would really consider this if you're thinking about time-lapse, and especially if you're on a budget. You can also save the time-lapse photos and anything from JPEG small to JPEG large to any combination of those and RAW. That means if you want to try and keep the file smaller, you can start with JPEG small and just see how it works as like test, and work your way all the way up to RAW as you progress, as your equipment progresses. So it's really impressive, and that's kind of the saving grace of this camera. Honestly, yes, it takes nice photos, but on the used market, you might be able to find something better. Yes, it takes decent video, but you can definitely find something better. Time-lapse, I welcome your comments. Try and find something better for the price range that can do equal quality time-lapse photos and have that same capability to do that long of a time-lapse. It's really amazing, and it's really surprising. I think they're trying to market this to smartphone people, and I can only guess that somebody in the development of this camera really likes time-lapse. I really don't know why, but for whatever reason, by inside time-lapse advocate to just complete accident, this camera has some serious time-lapse capability, and you have full functionality of your shutter speed and all that stuff in the normal setting screen. So you set it as you would like to, and you can take some really crisp photos or some more blurred photos. It's really up to you, and that's honestly, I think the market for this camera that nobody is talking about is for time-lapse. So I've talked about the time-lapse more than I've talked about anything else, but that's because this really is amazing. And I'm gonna be, like I said, I'm gonna be keeping this camera around. I have a new Tilta G2X gimbal, which has time-lapse capability. So I'll be using this and trying that out. All right, so all in all, it's not a terrible camera. It's not a great camera. It's up to you to decide if it fits your needs. If you already have it, you know, maybe you can understand a little bit more now how to work with it. If you haven't bought this camera yet, maybe I helped you make that decision. So good luck with whatever you're doing with your filming and photography. And I will be also doing some time-lapse demonstrations with this camera in the near future, as well as some other reviews. You'll be able to see them probably right here. If there's not a little thing there, I just look silly pointing at nothing. But that's okay. I pretty much always look silly and I'm used to it. So please subscribe. Please check out my other videos and I'll see you again. This is Todd Mellon. Thank you for watching.